Unfortunately, I used to work in a hotel in our town, which was devastated by a storm a few months ago. I'll omit the town and hotel names since I really don't want anything linked to me. Many houses were severely destroyed, so many people left the area. The hotel is roughly a 20-minute walk from my house. The motel was a very typical bed and breakfast, complete with frozen sausages, damp scrambled eggs, and various cereals. I always worked nights from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., and someone would relieve me at 2 a.m. They would work till 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. The hotel had a busy month following the hurricane because some people were out of their homes due to damage, but eventually things calmed down, if nothing else. Could always see how many people were checked into the hotel, and at the time there were only maybe 9 rooms, which wasn't a lot at all. There was a bell at the front desk that people would ring if they needed anything, and I was in the back when I heard a deep voice from the lobby saying hello repeatedly. I got up and went through the door leading to the back of the counter, and I saw a man on the other side of the glass. There was a glass barrier with an opening underneath that was about 10 inches high. He said he needed towels, so I grabbed a couple extra towels and slid them under the glass for him. He gave me this strange look, then walked to the room's hallway, sat on the rolling chair beside the monitors in the lobby, and watched the man on video move down the corridor. He was gazing around strangely, and then he began wiping the towels over his face. I asked aloud, "What in the world?" And he walked into the elevator. I returned to the break room, and after 10 or so minutes, I heard the same voice coming from the lobby. The man was standing on the opposite side as I stepped back out, and he stated loudly, "My key card is broken." As A's asked him what his room number was, he replied it was something odd, like 2C with a letter in it. Our hotel room was absolutely number-free. I knew this man was lying when I told him, "Sir, our rooms don't have letters. Are you sure you're staying here?" His response was unexpected and unanticipated. He threw the towels on the floor and began to smile, tilting his head slightly as he approached the glass, his face practically pressed against it. He continued to say, "I'm going to toll you," his smile growing louder and louder until it was almost a scream. I screamed back at him, "I'm calling the police," and I did, picking up the phone and showing him as I dialed 911 911. He began to make fun of me and call the police. I smiled and told the dispatcher over the phone what was happening in front of my face. He laughed and walked slowly toward the door. I told the dispatcher that he was leaving, and when he was gone, I told her that he was gone. She asked if I still wanted an officer to come, and I replied that it was okay. For obvious reasons, the next few hours of my shift went slowly, so I chose to stay in the lobby instead of the break room. At around 2 in the morning, a guest checked in. When I was able to clock out and go for, I felt relieved. The weather was cold, and I remember wishing I had packed my coat. When I heard someone chatting, I walked with my hood up and my hands in my thin jacket pockets. When I turned around, I saw a line of bushes covering the hotel's first-floor windows. I don't know what the voice said, but I didn't care. I walked faster. After a minute, I was on a main road, but there were no cars on the road in this quiet town at this hour. I turned left down a residential street that would eventually turn onto my block, and it was completely silent outside, not even the sound of distant traffic, just the sound of my shoes hitting the pavement, followed by the sound of someone else's footsteps hitting the pavement behind me. By the time I turned around, they had stopped. A car was directly behind me, and I nearly knew that someone was hiding behind it. I heard laughter, and then a familiar voice said, "I'm going to kill you quietly." I didn't even see him. I looked around, figuring out what I was going to do because I couldn't outrun a man, let alone with my work shoes on. I looked at the closest house, which had a light on upstairs, and I decided to run and call for help. I turned to face the car again and saw the man peeking out from behind it as he scampered around to the front, and when he reached the hood, The rest of his face and upper body were exposed, and I could see his disgusting, insane smile once more. I ran for the house, yelling, "Help me!" I reached the front door and rang the bell at least 3 times before the man grabbed me and began choking me while whispering in my ear, and I thought my life was flashing before my eyes. Then an angel in the form of a man opened the front door to the house and yelled, "Hey!" at the man choking me. The man's grip was released from my neck, and I fell to the ground. I didn't turn to see him flee, but the man from the house helped me up and brought me inside. He gave me water and called the police, and after I told them the entire incident, they gathered the man's CCTV footage from the hotel and placed feelers out to find him. I called into the police station and asked to identify which of the 5 men in the lineup looked like the man on the CCTV footage. I looked at them all for about 5 minutes before saying that it wasn't any of them. I'm not sure if the pressure and anxiety got to me, but at the time I really didn't recognize him to be in that lineup. I hope that I didn't make a mistake and let that man go free. I worked the closing shift alongside another cashier, who I'll name Nicole, in the pro department of a home improvement store. Nicole is a very sweet but shy cashier. She's also very attractive, so many contractors approach her. It's usually not a big deal, but a few compliments or even a dinner invitation, which she would politely decline, make her feel uncomfortable. However, when we first met, I told her that she should tell those guys that she's gay, but she kept saying it wasn't their business, so she kept that information to herself. Nicole has become my best friend, and having another cashier there keeps things from becoming lonely. We even cover each other's lunch breaks. Nicole began telling me about this rather creepy guy who was flirting with her one day when I got back from lunch. She said she politely declined him, saying she was already with someone else, and he didn't seem happy, so he left. I laughed it off, dismissing it as just another horny guy. But later that day, the man returned. Nicole wasn't there because she had gone to help a customer find some lumber, so it was just me. He looked pretty normal, probably attractive to most women, but he acted strangely. I asked him if I could help him with anything because I was here to see Nicole, and he replied that he had come in earlier and asked her out, to which he replied that he had, so he had returned to pick her up. I pad him that she had left for the day, which is a common lie people tell to cover for their friends. His smile vanished and he began to look irritated. He claimed that he wanted to talk to Nicole and ask her out again, which went against what he had just told me about accepting his previous invitation. I told him that he couldn't do that, so he crossed his arms and asked me why not. I'm not the best at making up excuses on the spot, but I didn't want to tell him that Nicole was gay if she didn't want him to know, so I just blurted out that Nicole was my fiancée. His irritated expression changed to be peroneus. Perplexity asked me how someone as attractive as she was able to go out with someone like me. I'm to Jason Moe or anything, but I don't think I'm that ugly. I told him that it didn't matter and that she and I were getting married in a few months, so he needed to back off. After Nicole returned, I told her what had happened, and she asked me to describe him. I told her that he looked like the same guy who had come in earlier, and she found the fiancé's excuse amusing. She even said that she'd rather be engaged to me than go out with him, which I assume was a compliment. A few weeks passed, and we had all but forgotten about the man by this point. But one night, after it had gotten dark, Nicole and I were gathering the trash so we could close down the registers and head home when we heard a bang at the door. "We're closed," I tell him, but he says he must get in. Nicole shouts at him again to let him know she's not interested. It was the same guy again, with a crazy expression in his eyes and his face plastered against the glass. He's here for me, but he responds that if he can, quote unquote, take out her husband, then she'd be all his. I won't lie, though, that I was pretty afraid to be in that small space, because if the guy is able to get in, he wasn't the biggest guy, but he could have had a weapon on him, and the store doesn't let us carry self-defense supplies, So I was alone. The guy then began ramming the sliding doors like he was crazy, and the doors were rattling. I could have sworn we were about to leave its base at that point. Nicole runs back around the corner with a 2x4 in her hand and yells that the police are coming. Eventually, the man decides to leave, so the closing manager meets the officers, takes them to look over the cameras. Fortunately, the man was apprehended and taken into custody, but neither Nicole nor I felt safe working there any longer. Although we are still friends and even attend the same college, we now work different jobs to pay for our classes. I'm glad she was there to help me with the rogue man because I can't bear to think of what he might have done to me, or worse. Nonsenses. She's glad I was there for her because having a guy around tends to make men like him less confident in what they might try. This occurred a little more than 2 years ago, and I wanted to post it someplace so that I could look back on it someday and never forget the lesson. It served as a wake-up call for me about how hazardous it can be for some women. Interested guy simply doesn't want to accept no. I found out that it was 2016, and I had just begun a new work at Jostle. It was low pay, but I needed an office job, so one of my friends, Michael, got me one for a few days. I spent 2 nights and 2 mornings training with the owner. Michael trained me for the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, which was boring except for checking guests in and completing paperwork. My boss, owner, long vacation with his wife, which is related to the swift training I had to go through. It was my first night working the night shift alone, and there was a monitor with security cameras surrounding the motel's property and large glass windows surrounding the office building with a glass door. Unlike most motels, there were no night windows, so it was still quite early in the morning, at around 1 a.m. I was just completing my routine check-in paperwork when a man asked if there were any rooms available. Normally, if someone is sketchy, my boss makes me lie and say no, but he seemed normal at the moment, so I said, "Yes, of course, just for one." And he replied, "Yes." I started making the reservation on the computer when I noticed that he started spitting and swatting the air as if he were surrounded by flies, but I tried to ignore it since it wasn't my concern. I gave him his key, and key was on his way. I hope you can all understand how I responded to what happened because I was rather shy at the time and had a lot going on in my personal life. The man then returns from his room and slams his hand on the glass door, making me jump in complete terror. I look up to see him just staring at me. He then cracks the door and pokes his head through, saying, "I can't get into my room. You let me into my room, defense is trying to be helpful." To which I replied, "Maybe there's something wrong with your key. You another one." The expression in his eyes was unfathomable, and I felt like I was in imminent danger. I gave him his new key and key, returned to his room. Since Michael is the one who taught me, I tried texting him for advice, but it was in the middle of the night and he was asleep. When I didn't hear back from him, I saw the man stumbling back down the stairs, and I went into complete panic mode. The man in the office is shouting, "Hello, why won't you let me into my room? Do you not like me?" I dash into the rear office, shut the door, and take out my pocket knife, since it's crucial to be safe when working at night. Night. Feeling scared, I choose to handle things alone and say, "I'm just on the phone right out." I then start calling Michael repeatedly for assistance, but he doesn't answer, so I decide to take a few deep breaths before leaving the office. I hear him telling himself angrily, "Kill her, kill her," and my heart sinks. I'm still an idiot and haven't called the police. Polices, and I say, "Your key was broken. I'm sorry. Let me escort you to your room." He agrees, and gratefully I was wearing a long-sleeved sweater, which allowed me to conceal my knife in my hand. I started to go outside, and he seemed determined to follow me as we started to ascend to his room via the staircase. He stopped at a room, and I stopped at his room a few doors down. I was sweating because I was so nervous that I kept checking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move. I smiled and said, "Oh, that's the wrong room, the room on the door." The entire time he was going to someone else's room and trying to open the door, I hurried back to the office and locked the door, and I discovered that there was a lone woman staying in the other room. He was attempting to enter the next guest I checked in, a police officer from a few towns over. I felt bad for telling him about the guy, but he seemed willing to keep an eye and ear out. The following night the man returned, but I had the doors locked and told him we were all booked up. When supervisor returned from vacation, I told him what had happened, but he didn't take it seriously. I continued working the night shift there for the following year, during which time I had many more odd experiences, but this was one of the worst. Every night I felt a growing sense of unease, as if I were being watched from the shadows. Each creak of the old building echoed ominously, reminding me that not all guests checked in for the night with good intentions.